Well, now the wild card round of the NFL playoffs is in the books, which means we know officially the order for picks 1 through 24 in the 2016 NFL draft. So it's time for me to give you an updated mock draft. This is only going to be a one-round edition. After the divisional round of playoffs, I will give you a two-round mock, and then after the conference championship round, I will go ahead and give you a three-round mock, and then probably after the Super Bowl, I might even give you a four-round mock or maybe another three-round mock. You're going to get pretty much a mock draft every single week here on going forward to the 2016 NFL Draft. My one-round mock is in the description box down below. You can check out all 31 picks there. And as always, you're welcome to chime in with your thoughts and comments and questions about them in the comment section below, and I'll try to get to as many of your points and criticisms and questions as I possibly can. So anyways, this one-round mock draft, what can we talk about here? Well, you'll notice that some things have changed, but it's not as fluid from week to week as some of the other mock drafts have been. Like I said, there have been some changes, and there are some changes here at the top, and that will be something you'll see from time to time as I go through different strategies, or as I go through different possible scenarios, or I just float different shit out there and see if it sticks against the wall. But, even now still doing the mocks, we know who some of the new head coaches are going to be for some of these teams, but we don't know all of them. So, it's hard still to do a mock draft because we don't know what's going to happen in terms of free agency. We don't know everybody's place in terms of coaches, general managers. A lot of that's left to be determined, but this is the best stab I've got at trying to figure out how things would play out if the draft was held today. Now, in terms of some prospects that are likely to rise and likely to fall, let me focus on some of the ones that you'll probably hear a lot more about as the draft process goes along. Some of them could shoot up from being guys you've seen projected to second-round picks all the way up to the top 10 or top 5. Other guys could be just guys that were at the lower end of round 1 that end up going to the middle portion of round 1 or maybe slide into the top 10. The first one, obviously, for me is going to be Carson Wentz, the quarterback from North Dakota State. I'm on record on how I feel about him, the best quarterback prospect in the 2016 NFL draft class, and I guarantee you, I'll put money on it. A lot of teams are going to view him as the number one quarterback prospect. And in terms of teams out of the 32 organizations in the NFL, I bet you the number one quarterback prospect on more boards than any other quarterback is going to be Carson Wentz. And I wouldn't be surprised when all is said and done at the end of the day if he isn't the first quarterback selected in this year's draft. I'm just saying. And if it does end up happening, remember, you probably heard it from me first, so make sure you give me my dab and my credit later on. Then I look at DeForest Buckner, the defensive end from Oregon. His teammate Eric Armstead went 17th overall last draft to the San Francisco 49ers. Buckner was a better player last year, and he's most certainly a better prospect to me. You're looking at a guy, especially with the number of teams that play a 3-4, picking in the top 10. To me, DeForest Buckner, it would be a crime and a shame and a shock if he didn't end up in the first 10 picks. And frankly, I think there's a very good chance that he ends up going top 5 because he may be viewed as the best pure 3-4 defensive lineman in this draft and a better fit for some teams' defense than as opposed to, let's say, somebody like a Joey Bosa from Ohio State. People will sleep on Buckner for this reason or that reason because he hasn't had the media hype, because he played at Oregon, because he's a 3-4 defensive end. But if you watch the film, you'll know why there's going to be an increasing amount of buzz about this guy in the weeks and months leading up to the April draft. I look at Eli Apple, the corner from Ohio State. You've got quite a few corners with some significant questions in terms of Vernon Hargreaves and Mackenzie Alexander in terms of their height and size. Whether or not that should matter or not is irrelevant. The point is that is going to matter to some NFL teams, and they may slide them down the boards a little bit because they're not 6'1", 6'2". Well, Eli Apple is about 6'1", and he's got really good speed, and he's a redshirt sophomore. So there's a rawness to his game, but there is a big-time athletic upside and potential to his game. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he shoots up the boards. And as you see in my mock draft, because I have Jalen Ramsey going number 11 to Chicago, but I've got him going as a defensive back, meaning I view him more as a safety for the Bears than I do a corner. Eli Apple going to 12 to New Orleans, I think he might be the first pure corner off of the board in this year's draft. We'll just see how it goes. Another person that's likely to rise or another position. The number 3 offensive tackle in this draft. Here's what I mean. Laremy Tunsil has a very good chance of going number 1 overall. Doesn't drop out of the top 3 in my opinion, unless something significant happens that we can't foresee at this moment. Ronnie Stanley being that clear-cut number 2 offensive tackle in this draft class. His ceiling could be number 3 to San Diego, but his floor is probably no lower than number 8 to Miami or number 9 to Tampa Bay at this point in time. What that means is that you've got a clearly set market for these top 2 guys. Somebody right below them is, as a consequence, going to be elevated because where these 2 guys fall is going to artificially inflate the draft stock of that 3rd offensive tackle. Whether that's, in this case, I have a Jack Conklin. Some teams might look at Shon Coleman as the number 3 offensive tackle, even though I'm not sure guys will want to spend a top 12 or 15 pick on a guy that's 24 years of age. I don't know about that. Or maybe a Taylor Decker from Ohio State. Maybe it's a Jason Spriggs from Indiana. You know, whoever ends up being that number 3 offensive tackle and whoever is viewed as the most likely outside of Tunsil and Stanley to be able to stick at left tackle at the NFL level, at this moment I think some teams will look at that and say it was Jack Conklin. That 3rd tackle is going to rise and end up being taken in the first 15 picks. That's just my opinion. Now looking at some players that could potentially, one more that could likely rise. And you know I've had them consistently in the bottom portion of my mock drafts for the past month plus, and that's Yannick Ngakoue, from Maryland. You know, in a draft that lacks for me in pure 3-4 edge rushers or really, really high upside 3-4 edge rushers, you're going to hear a lot about Leonard Floyd being that top guy. But over the past couple of years, when I watched Yannick at Maryland, you know, whether it was against Brandon Scherf or against other offensive tackles in the Big Ten with big names and profiles, like, you know, whether it be a Jack Conklin or a Taylor Decker or a Jason Spriggs, this guy held up really, really well and at times dominated. In fact, when I go back to 2014, I thought at times he made Brandon Scherf look stupid. And in part it was film like that that made it obvious that Scherf had to play inside at guard at the NFL level. So when you look at talking about teams looking for an impact edge rusher in a 3-4, a guy like Ngakoue could be a natural fit. I just have to learn how to say his last name better. But I think he's a guy that you could see that you don't know a lot about now that could rise up the boards as the draft process continues. Now let's talk about some guys that are likely to fall. I've made my piece very known about Connor Cook. I can't believe I ever thought he was a first-round mock draft pick. He most certainly is not going to go in the first round, especially with a very, very poor performance, frankly, in the national championship semifinal against Alabama. The questions about him in terms of his character and his leadership and his maturity, combined with the fact that he decided to skip the Senior Bowl, similar to what A.J. McCarron did a couple of years ago, and that really plummeted his draft stock. I think that could do much of the same for Connor Cook. I'd be surprised if Connor Cook is even a day 2 pick at this point in time. I really would. Robert Nkemdiche from Ole Miss, I've made this well known, and I've been saying it for months, even before he fell out of a 4th-story Atlanta hotel room window. You know, there were character concerns, there's athleticism, there's clearly upside there. But you've got some questions about influence, mainly his brother, who seems to be a dipshit and a really bad influence on Robert. You're also looking at the fact that, yes, the guy flashes athletic upside and potential, but he really doesn't finish plays. He's not a natural pass rusher. What is his pure positional fit at the NFL level? Even if you didn't have all of the off-the-field questions about a guy like Nkemdiche, I think he's a late first round to early to mid second round pick. When you factor in those other concerns about him, there's a chance that he ends up going late round 2, round 3, maybe even round 4, depending on how the background checks go. I just think it's crazy. Like similar to Connor Cook, I think if you see a mock draft right now that has Nkemdiche going in the top 10, you should look at that mock draft, realize that that person has absolutely zero credibility when it comes to doing a mock draft and understanding the draft process, and you should probably never read them or ever listen to them ever again about anything pertaining to the NFL draft because they have no clue, period. And I'll go on record and saying that. Obviously, Jalen Smith is probably due for some fall because he tore his ACL and his MCL in that bowl game against Ohio State, and that sucks for him because he was one of the safer prospects in this draft. He was a top 10 talent. And I still think even with the knee injury, he is a top 10 talent in this draft. But his range now is probably going to be, his ceiling could be number 11 to Chicago. Maybe they would be willing to potentially redshirt the guy for most or all of his rookie year because of the upside and the fit in the middle of that 3-4 defense. I think his absolute floor would be 20 to the New York Jets because at that point in time where the Jets would be sitting, you know, to get a guy with that talent, with that potential upside, yeah, there's risk there, but it wouldn't be a huge need for him to have to play right away, so he's a guy that they could sit on for a year potentially, and then start 2017 and really get some bang for their buck out of him. I've got him going 17 to Atlanta in this mock draft, and I think that's a good fit. I think that's a good place for him. I think that would be a great decision for the Atlanta Falcons, and I think it's somewhat reasonable in terms of where he could end up. I think he's still going to be a top 20 pick. If Jaylon Smith doesn't go in the top 20, even with the knee injury and the concerns, there is something fundamentally wrong with the draft process. And it speaks to the lack of intelligence and understanding of the draft process and talent of front offices throughout the entire NFL. And you can put me on record as saying that too. And then you've got maybe Vernon Hargreaves, the corner from Florida. Like I said, there were times this year that he wasn't as impressive as many people made him out to be. There were times where he got burnt for big plays. Talking about a corner who I wonder how his speed is going to translate to the NFL level. I wonder, is his size going to be viewed as a negative? I don't think he drops out of the top 20 picks, but I don't think he's going to be a top 10 guy, at least at the way it sits at this moment. I think, again, he's more of a guy in the 11 to 20 range, not the 5 to 10 that you've maybe seen him by a lot of so-called experts for the past several months. In terms of the picks, as you look at them down below, you'll notice I still got Tunsil going number 1 to Tennessee. It's the safe, sensible choice for them at that point in time. Now that the Cleveland Browns have surprisingly hired Hugh Jackson to be their next head coach, Manziel's gone. Quarterback's got to be the pick here. They're probably going to play it safe. Jared Goff will probably remind Hugh Jackson in some ways of Andy Dalton. And if that's who he's going to be comfortable with, and if that's who he's going to buy into, and if that's who he's going to believe in, then that's the quarterback that they need to take. That's the guy they need to take. Now, some of you may be surprised at number 4 that the Cowboys are taking Myles Jack, the linebacker from UCLA. I think there's more and more buzz that could be a possibility just because of the value and the athletic upside of the player. There's some miscommunication about the fact that people think Myles Jack's knee injury was a torn ACL. It was not. It was a meniscus issue. That's entirely different and not as severe of an injury. And based off of his athletic upside, to me, Myles Jack is one of the best players in this entire draft. Picking him at number 4 would make a lot of sense for the Cowboys because they just need talent on both sides of the ball. You'll see some mock drafts that have Laquon Treadwell going there. I think that's a bit high, but that would make sense. Some will have Ezekiel Elliott going there. That might be a bit of a luxury pick at that point in time, but I wouldn't knock the Cowboys that tremendously either because, again, I think Ezekiel Elliott is also one of the best prospects in this entire draft class and maybe the number 1 player in this entire draft. In terms of the Jaguars at number 5, Ronnie Stanley, he's there. Jokel stinks at left tackle. You got to get a left tackle to be able to protect Blake Bortles. Yes, there are needs on defense, but you got to keep your quarterback upright and healthy first and foremost. So that's the number 1 need of the organization, frankly. You've got Bosa going 6 to Baltimore. It'd be interesting to see how he would fit. Would they try to bulk him up and play him end in the 3-4? I know Baltimore likes their 3-4 edge rushers to be a little bit bigger, so Bosa would maybe fit into that category, similar to like a Pernell McPhee, a Terrell Suggs. Guys like that, they like their edge rushers to be a little bit bigger, play with a little more power. And Bosa would kind of fit into there, and it would kind of be that safer pick for an Ozzie Newsome. You'd figure out how to make it work, but it probably would work to a certain degree. A lot of people now think with the surprising hire of Chip Kelly by the San Francisco 49ers, that means Colin Kaepernick's get a second lease on life, and maybe he does. But now, the way I look at it for Chip Kelly, he's moved up 6 slots in the draft from 13 to 7. If he wants Carson Wentz, there's a very good chance he could get him or be in position to go up and get him. And again, he couldn't get his guy Marcus Mariota last year. Carson Wentz is very reminiscent to me of Marcus Mariota in many ways. Carson Wentz could be a good long-term answer for the San Francisco 49ers. So there you go. I've still got the Giants taking Ezekiel Elliott because at that point in time, to me, he would be the best player on the board. He would be a tremendous fit and help both sides of the ball for the New York Giants because it would balance out their offense, which would mean that they would keep their defense off the field more, which all automatically, instantly would limit the amount that defense is exposed and make that defense better. So those are my picks. Let me know your thoughts on other players that are maybe likely to rise or fall as the draft process continues over the past couple of months. Let me know what you think of the picks that I have for your team, where I have certain guys going. I'm curious to hear all of your thoughts in the comments section below.